Hello everyone and welcome back to another Wizard101 video. Today we're going to be talking about what gear sets you should farm for in Wizard101 Console Edition. Now obviously first off this goes for PC too, so if you're clicking on this does apply to PC. I've made this video in the past, but obviously there's been new gear sets added since then that are worth talking about. Now before I get into this video I want to mention a few things. First off, obviously, not every gear set is on here. There are hundreds of gear sets in Wizard101 and hundreds of unique pieces of gear that probably are worth talking about, but if I included all of them, this video would probably be 3 hours long. So today I just want to talk about all of the best gear sets and the mainline ones that most people are going to know about and potentially farm. Second, I want to talk about the fact that crown shop gear is not included here. That's for a few reasons. First off, obviously not everyone has crowns. Second off, personally, I don't think that Crown's gear is worth it at any point in this game. Obviously, Crown's gear is usually better than the farmed gear, and I can say that for any level. Crown's gear is usually going to be better, but Crown's gear is never worth it enough to the point where I think it's worth spending my money on when I can just farm for gear that very easily can get me through the game. If you want to min-max, yes, you should buy crowns and you should buy crown shop gear, but it's not worth it. I'm going to say it right now, unless you're level 170, you should probably never be spending money on packs with the intention of getting gear specifically to get gear. If you want to buy packs obviously to get a mount or something, or to get an aesthetic, whatever, and then you just so happen to get gear that's good for you, sure, that's fine. But personally, I don't think I'd ever recommend farming for it. Now, how this video is going to be set up is I'm doing this in a tier list format and kind of going with how worth it is it to farm that gear. However, take this all with kind of not a grain of salt, but this is my opinion. If you want to farm for any of these gear sets, obviously you can. Is it necessarily worth farming? I'll leave that up to you. Personally, I believe, like what I'm going to put on here, that's kind of how I look at it. But if you're like, oh, this gear set seems interesting, go farm for it. But enough rambling, enough preamble. Let's get into what gear you should farm for in the game. Starting off, we have Kembaalung Village at level 25. Now you start Kembaalung Village by going to Sergeant Major Talbot in the Oasis in Krakatopia, and following that quest line, I believe all of the gear is dropped from Master Tonkatsu at the end. There are some other things that are potentially useful to get, like I believe the Oni in Hollow Mountain can drop an amulet that gives feint for balance, so maybe a balance should farm this, but literally every other school, I'm going to say, probably shouldn't farm for Kembaalung Village gear. Now, there are a few reasons for this, and the main one I'm going to say is the fact that Kembaalung itself is not long, but it's for a level 25, it's a little on the long side, and it's outshined by the fact that you get Mount Olympus gear in 5 levels. Now, I'm going to talk about Mount Olympus gear next, but realistically, 5 levels is going to take you maybe an hour to get, and it's going to take you longer than an hour to farm for all of the Kembaalung Village gear. So if you add it up in your head, I would definitely just wait another 5 levels and go to Mount Olympus. Next up, we have Mount Olympus, and you start Mount Olympus once you reach level 30. If you go to Cyrus Drake in Ravenwood in the Myth School, he will give you the quest to start Mount Olympus. Now, recently, KingsIsle added a pity system where if you beat each of the bosses a certain amount of times, you can craft the gear instead of getting them from drops. However, it is a very unrewarding system where you need to beat Zeus 35 times, which at level 30 is probably going to take you 20 plus hours of gameplay to do, and in that 20 hours of gameplay you probably could have gotten to Dragonspire anyway. So should you farm this to the point where you get the pity system? No. But Zeus gear is absolutely really good for this level, and it will carry you all the way to level 60 if you get it. At the very least, you should be doing Mount Olympus 1 time to get the Sky Iron Hasta, which will last you as a wand up until probably Chrysalis and level 100. You may be like, if you're new to the game, you may be like, how is that possible? The wand gives 10% damage, which most wands don't really give damage up until around Chrysalis, so that wand is going to be really, really good up until that level. Dragonspire gear, like Malistaire gear, also gives damage on the wands, but I believe for most schools it's less than 10, except for like Storm and maybe Fire. So if you want on those wizards, you can farm for the Dragonspire gear to get a better wand, but otherwise every school Sky Iron Hasta all the way up to like level 100. That's how good it is, and you get a guaranteed one for doing Mount Olympus. So absolutely, Mount Olympus I would say is an A tier in terms of worth farming. It is incredibly good, and the gear set will last you. It is difficult, but it's very rewarding if you actually do get it. Next up, we have Barkingham Palace. And Barkingham Palace, you start at level 40 by talking to Private Kinchley right next to the world door in Marleybone, and he will give you the quest line to do it. There are 3 parts to the dungeon, and I'm going to say this gear set is definitely not really worth getting. Similar to Kembaalung Village, it's one of those where if you've gotten Zeus gear already, you definitely don't need this because it's barely an upgrade. And if not, the Dragonspire gear is probably slightly better anyway. And if not, you know, Wintertusk Crafted is definitely better. So it's not really that worth farming. Chief Whip can drop a ring that gives damage, which he is part of the second part of the dungeon. You fight him twice. So technically there's 2 chances to get the ring. But the main issue with this dungeon, I will say, beyond the fact that people don't do it a ton, is the fact that all the bosses have about 5,000 health, which at level 40 is a lot. Like, compare that to other bosses you're fighting at level 40 in Mushu and Dragonspire, who have, you know, probably like maybe 3,000 health at most. It's just like an insane difficulty spike. So Barkingham Palace gear, not worth it at all. I thought I'd at least mention it because some people will do it and be like, yeah, sure, why don't I try to get this gear? This dungeon's not worth it, and the only reason it's in D is because it is actually an increase compared to Zeus gear, but it's like, is it worth it despite that? Not really. Next up, we have Dragonspire World gear, also known as Malistaire gear. All of this gear is dropped from Malistaire and the bosses in the Great Spire, which is the final dungeon of Dragonspire, and this gear is actually really good. For level 50, this gear will definitely last you like probably until, you could stretch it all the way to 100 if you want, but obviously Waterworks is going to be better, or level 60 gear is going to be better, but it is pretty good. And at the very least, the rings and the athames are good as well because they give damage, and a lot of rings and athames don't give decent damage until later on in this game. So it is worth it to do, but there are some issues with the Dragonspire World gear. The first thing, and this goes double for console, is that the dungeon is very long to do, and getting to Malistaire is probably going to take like 25 to 30 minutes, even if you have a higher level carrying you through it. This means that doing runs to get this world gear are going to go slow, and that means that in that time you're spent farming for the Dragonspire World gear, you probably could have gained enough levels to get, say, Wintertusk Crafted, or even to the level 60 range of gear. So keep that in mind. For almost all of these, it's like picking and choosing how you want to spend your time, because you could spend your time farming for this gear set, and the next world or a world and a half is going to be a lot easier for you, or you can struggle through the world a little bit more but gain the levels and then farm for a gear set that's going to be even better. Dragonspire World gear, I'll probably put it at a C or a B. The wands are worth it for most schools. They give decent damage compared to the Sky and Hasta and a little bit of Pierce, but not every school, and the Ring and Athame are good. But actually, like, farming for it is rather difficult. I'll put it into C. I don't think it's worth a B. It's decent, but it's like, in that time you spent farming for it, you could have done other things. Next up is Wintertusk Crafted. Now, Wintertusk Crafted has multiple caveats to it. The first off, you need to be a Grandmaster Crafter at the very least to get it, which you need to do a decent amount of crafting for. That's up to Celestia crafting. It's going to take you quite a bit of time to get that, especially when we're new and there's no reagents in the bazaar. It is going to be difficult to get your crafting up. Without double reagents and free crafting, it's gonna be a struggle. On top of that, you need to do up to Sudreland and Wintertusk to do it. You start Grizzleheim by talking to Merlambros, and I believe that the level 20 lock is off of it now, so you can do it at like any level once you get to Croc, I believe, or like a little bit past Croc. Once you start the Grizzleheim quest, you can go all the way up to Wintertusk now with no level locks, but Wintertusk is incredibly difficult and most people won't do it until at least level 40. This gear itself is level 56 gear, so that should put into perspective around the time that most you'd expect to be at like this stage of Wintertusk. Now, on top of that, the Wintertusk Crafted takes a lot of reagents to do, which potentially bump it down a few things. Now, I've talked about the negatives, let's talk about the positives. This gear set is massively above anything we've talked about on this list so far. It gives really good damage, decent resist, and the other stats like power pip and accuracy are also good as well. And they give item cards like an item card blade, which you can stack on top of your regular blade to do even more damage, which is very, very useful to have in a gear set. So that does have it going for it, but with its drawbacks, I'm probably going to put it at a B tier because of the fact that like you don't have to farm it, which is good. However, getting the reagents are probably going to be more frustrating than farming anyway, and it's really good, but there is the downside, you have to craft it. Otherwise, it would probably be a bit bit higher. Next up, we have the Celestia Atavistic gear, and this was added recently to the game. It's dropped from like 5 different bosses in Celestia. One of them's a side quest that I don't remember how to get to. There's Queen Calypso, Praetor Mako, Big Salgio at the end of the chancel, and then Mithraea at the end of Celestia. And the pity system, similar to the other ones, is through a badge. Realistically, it's not worth it to get these badges. It's going to take you a very long time, but this gear is decent, and it's one of those where I'm going to put it into B tier because I don't think it's really worth farming. I have a video on it that I uploaded like 3 or 4 months ago now, I believe, if you want to go check that out for a more in-depth guide to Celestia Atavistic gear. But it's worth potentially getting a piece or two to supplement the other level 60 gear sets. But is it worth farming individually? No. The drop rate I've heard isn't the best, and obviously the pity system, as I mentioned, is not worth doing because like even just killing Big Salgio 35 times, that's going to take you hours and hours of time that you could have spent farming for any of the other gear sets and potentially getting them much faster. So I'll put it in a B. It's worth talking about, but I don't think it's necessarily worth farming. I'll leave it up to you whether you want to actually farm it yourself, but I figured I'd at least talk about it. Next up is Waterworks gear, and this is the gear set that everyone talks about, and I'm sure most of you even know about because Waterworks has been in the game since like 2009 or 2010, I believe, and this is going to be our first S tier because Waterworks gear, there's no school that it's not worth farming for. It gives incredible damage, good resist, and it gives power up or accuracy depending on what school you are, and it's going to carry you through all of Arc 2. If you get Waterworks gear, you don't need another gear set up until level 100. That's how good Waterworks gear is. Now, you start Waterworks by going to, I believe, Sahomar Sunblade or Blad Raveneye in Triton Avenue. I don't remember which one. It's one of the two. At level 60, you'll get the notification from them to go talk to them to start the quest. You go into Crab Alley, you do the dungeon. I will say, on console, this is going to be difficult. There aren't max levels carrying you here, and there are cheats in this dungeon, so be sure to look up the cheats and pay close attention to them. However, this gear set is very much worth it. I'm talking like most schools, you can get up to the 70 to 100 damage range at this level, which is really, really good. On certain schools, like on Storm, if you have a good pet and you have like optimum stats, you can get up to like 130 damage at level 60, which I can't stress enough is insane. That's going to carry you all the way through Darkmoor into Chrysalis, potentially even Polaris. That's how good this gear set is. So absolutely worth farming it. Just go do Waterworks if you haven't. It's going to be difficult at level 60, but I promise you there's going to be a lot of other people doing it in probably team up or around it, especially in the coming weeks when people start getting to Waterworks. A lot of people are going to be doing it. If you're watching this video like a year down the line, that might not be the case anymore, but I digress. Next up, we have Zigazag, and Zigazag is an interesting gear set. It is part of the 4 dungeons again, unlocked at level 60. You go to Alhaz Red in Krokotopia to start the quest. It's similar to Celestia Atavistic gear and Waterworks, it's a level 60 gear set. However, first off, it is better than Waterworks. The hat and the robe are better than the Waterworks gear. So if you're truly min-maxing, you should go for Zigazag, hat and robe. And then the boots, you should probably use Waterworks or Wintertusk Crafted. However, Zigazag is definitely more difficult than Waterworks. Less people do it, I would say, on average, and the drop rate is lower. So with all of those factors added up, I would say Zigazag, it like drops 2 tiers on the worth it scale, despite the fact it is better in the hat and robe than the Waterworks gear. So if you're truly min-maxing, go for Zigazag. However, for most people, I'm going to say it's not worth doing beyond doing like once just to actually potentially get the drops and at the very least get the XP. Next up, we have Atlantea, which is in Aquila. It is the second Aquila dungeon unlocked at level 70 after Mount Olympus. And Atlantea gear is going to be probably our second F tier. And I know that sounds crazy considering how good Mount Olympus gear, but hear me out. Atlantea gear is designed to be a Pierce gear set. And at level 70, Pierce is not going to be the most important stat in the game. Pierce doesn't really start playing a factor until post level 100. So while it is useful potentially to have at this level, the damage fall off this gear has to compensate for the Pierce is insanely bad to the point where it is miles worse than Waterworks. On top of that, you need to beat Poseidon 20 times for the pity system to activate, which considering 20 times to get this really mediocre gear set, it is not worth getting at all. Now, it's worth doing the dungeon once just so you can get to Tartarus. However, getting Atlantea gear is just not worth it. All right, next up we have Tartarus, which is the third part of the Aquila dungeons unlocked at level 90. Now, I'm going to say Tartarus itself and Hades gear is not worth farming because Tartarus is a very long dungeon. even with max levels carrying you through it, it's going to take like an hour. That is how long this dungeon is. And at the time, it was probably the most difficult dungeon of the game until Darkmoor came out. So that should put into perspective just how difficult it is to farm this gear. Now, it is a decent upgrade from Waterworks. Specifically, I believe it's the gear set that's not titled Hades gear. There's another gear set that gives resist, which is decently better than Waterworks. However, it's just such a low drop rate and the dungeon's so long, it's not worth doing. You can obviously craft the gear with a pity system, but 20 Hades runs is going to take you like literally 20 hours. That's how long this dungeon is. And in that time, you could have very easily quested through most of Chrysalis and gotten from level 90 to 100. So not worth doing at all. However, in this section, I do want to talk about the Blade of Felt Titan in the Alpha and Omega ring. The Blade of Felt Titan is dropped by the secret boss of Cronus in Tartarus. It's first thing on the left when you enter the dungeon. And the Alpha and Omega ring is dropped by Gladiator Democaris, which is behind Eris Golden Apple in Mount Olympus. Right behind her puzzle, there's a door there, and once you go through it, Gladiator Democaris is there, and he drops the Alpha and Omega ring. Now, both of these are some of the best Athaemen ring, not necessarily in the game, but it's going to last you from level 90, potentially all the way up to the 150 to 160 range. That's how good these are. They can last you that long very easily. Obviously, there's better Athaems in between, but if you just wanted to stick with these, you could. However, the drop rates have recently been lowered for these to the point where the gear drops on like Gladiator Democaris, he only drops one item per run, and your chance of getting the Alpha and Omega ring is so low to the point where you could potentially go 200 runs without getting the Alpha and Omega ring. That's how low it is. So while I think it's worth mentioning, I don't think it's worth farming Tartarus like at all. And at this point, the Alpha and Omega ring and the Blade of Felt Titan are hard enough to the point where I'd probably put this in a D tier. It's just really not worth your time. And by the time you get everything you want, you could already be level 100 and getting Chrysalis World gear, Darkmoor gear, and just having a better time all around. Next up, we have the Chrysalis World gear, also known as the Morganthe gear compared to the Malistaire gear. And I'm just going to also put this in a C tier because I think that it's decent, but there are other gear that's better than it. However, the wand is definitely absolutely worth getting. The wand is dropped by Moros, the death tree, right outside of the Shadow Palace, which I will say is by far the best piece of this gear to get because it gives good damage and pierce. This wand will last you probably up until like level 150 plus. That's how good it is. And it's a sizable upgrade from the Sky and Hasta at this point. So most schools, I would recommend farming for this gear from the Death Tree, specifically because Moros, the Death Roots, it's probably the easiest of all these bosses to beat. The other pieces of gear are dropped from the Galleries and Morganthe. The Galleries is such a long dungeon, I probably wouldn't recommend farming it at all. But Morganthe, you can choose to farm if you want to. A lot of people might. However, this gear, I would say, isn't like super worth it, and that's why it's in C tier. It's like, it's better than all of the gear that I've mentioned up until this point, but is it worth going out of your way to farm it? Probably not, besides maybe the wand. Now, the Darkmoor gear, on the other hand, is definitely worth talking about. Darkmoor is the final of the 4 dungeons to talk about on this list. It's unlocked at level 100 by talking to Dworgen, and he gives you the quest line to do Darkmoor. Darkmoor is probably one of the hardest dungeons in this game, and on console, it's probably going to be really bad. So I would recommend looking up some guides, looking up what each boss does for cheats before doing it, because if you don't know what you're doing, you're going to have a rough time. Hell, even just go to a YouTube video and look up a guide on it. I have a guide on it. I'm sure other people probably have an even better guide because mine was probably created a few years ago. It's a difficult dungeon, but Darkmoor gear is so good that it is worth getting. Yevgeny drops the Athaem, Shane Von Shane in the second part of Darkmoor drops an amulet, Aphrodite drops a ring, and then Malistaire the Undying drops the hat, robe, and boots. The hat, robe, and boots and the Athaem are mainly what's worth getting. Most people don't farm Aphrodite at all. Like, Aphrodite ring is a low drop chance and most people don't farm for it. And then the Shane Von Shane amulet, most people don't farm for it either because it's part of the second part of Darkmoor, which is a bit, like, not harder, but people aren't as used to it as the third part of Darkmoor, so most people don't even go for the amulet, but I figured it was worth mentioning. But all of this gear, if you get it, will last you until probably level 150 to 160 if you just play the game. Like, you don't need an upgrade. Obviously, there are upgrades, but Darkmoor gear is going to last you a very long time, and it is a very good gear set. Obviously, it is a difficult dungeon, but I think that this is going to be the second S tier that is absolutely worth farming. Alright, next up we have the Dragoon gear. And the Dragoon gear used to be an incredible gear set. Back in the day when the Catacombs came out, you started with this gear set, and the bonus to the damage at that point of the game was insane. Everyone went from around the 100 range, and like Storm was at like 130, to everyone having around the 170 range of damage. That's what you need to understand, is it was a huge jump. Specifically, you farmed for the hat, the boots, and the amulet. And the reason for that is that with 3 pieces of gear, you would get a gear set bonus, and this gear set bonus would give you an extra like 10 damage. That's why it was so good. However, let's start with the downsides of this gear set and why I hate Dragoon gear. First off, the drop rate is very low. Second off, without getting double reagents, the reagents to craft this gear also drop pretty infrequently. Third, it is in the catacombs, and the catacombs, in my opinion, are the worst part of this game, bar none. It has a ton of cheating bosses that KingsIsle kind of just went all out on to make very difficult, but to the point where they're not fun. The cheats that these bosses have just make the fights really unbearable and not even a fun challenge to do, to the point where I really don't like the Dragoon gear, and I've never farmed for it after that first time because of that. Now, to get the Dragoon gear, so if you want to check it out yourself, you can start the catacombs by talking to Renee Wolfton in Gollum Court, but I wouldn't recommend it. I'm not gonna lie to you, I would probably put this at my second F tier, because in the time it takes you to get Dragoon gear, especially if you don't have double reagents, if the time it takes you to get this gear, you could very easily not only get to Karamelle gear at 140, but Merciless at 150. That's how long it's gonna take you to get this. It's just not worth it. So I'm gonna put Dragoon in F. If you disagree with me, you can let me know in the comments below, but I don't think this gear set's worth it at all, but I figured I'd at least mention it. All right, everyone, this is Future Noah coming back to re-record this part, because I'm not going to lie to you, I thought the Karamelle gear was way different than it was, and this entire section I would have been pretty wrong if I didn't go and check to make sure that the gear is what I thought it was. So I went back and I looked at it, and I'm not gonna lie, Karamelle gear is way worse than I thought. So I'm actually gonna put Karamelle gear in probably a D or an F tier. It is a decent increase to the Darkmoor gear if you still have that at this point. If you're still kind of hanging around with the level 100 gear, there are a few things that can be good increases, like some of the rings, the wand isn't bad, and the boots are actually pretty good. The Uber gear boots dropped by the Aberrant Paradox are pretty decent. However, the rest of it is pretty bad, I'm not gonna lie, because most of it doesn't give like a certain stat like resist, the robe doesn't give damage. There's just a lot to it that makes it pretty bad. So I'm gonna put it, I might actually put it in F tier, because I really don't think any of it's that worth farming, especially because the next section of Merciless is pretty decent. Now, Merciless is actually very similar to the next category of Aeon, it's just slightly worse. So it's one of those things where if you farm Merciless in 10 levels, you're just gonna be probably replacing it anyway with Aeon, and same with Aeon, if you don't farm that in 10 levels, you're gonna get Reaver. So it's one of those things where whether you want it or not is up to you, but Merciless is actually pretty decent to the point where I would probably put it in the B tier category, because it's actually much easier to get than, say, the Reaver or the Aeon. So if you, at this point, still have the Darkmoor gear, you should try to get some of the Merciless gear. The Merciless gear is dropped from the final fight of Lemuria, the hero fight. I've heard that the drop rate is pretty low in standard. Challenge mode has a higher drop rate, but the challenge mode is so much more difficult that you probably should do the non-challenge mode anyway and see what you can get. Personally, I think Merciless is good, but it's not like nearly as good as, you know, everything above it. The B tier seems to be kind of like the gear sets that are decent, but there's alternatives that are just simply better, is what I've noticed. So that's probably where I'd put Merciless. It's up to you whether to get it or not. But either way, we're getting back into the video. If you're curious to why Karamelle and Merciless are going to both be in C tier, that's because I didn't actually really think about what Karamelle was. I misremembered what Karamelle was, and then Merciless, I kind of didn't think about it as much because I thought it was similar to Karamelle, but the opinions change a little bit based on where Karamelle is. So back to our regularly scheduled programming. Next up, we have the Aeon gear set, and the Aeon gear set is the gear set that was dropped at the end of Novus at level 160. This gear is very good. If you're still on the Darkmoor gear, it might be time to upgrade that and farm for a few pieces. Now, the actual pieces of these are scattered throughout the different fights. The hat, robe, and wand are dropped from the pretty much final fight of Novus, which is the Atavis, the giant Aeon of Atavis thing, which is a long fight, so keep that in mind if you want to farm for it. The hat, robe, and wand, which by the way are probably the best parts of the gear set. Rontanton dropped drops the boots. He is a side quest that you can pick up from the waitress in Porto Nuovo, I believe. If you follow that quest line, it'll lead you to Rontanton, and he drops the boots, which again are really good. Maxine Rock-Hopier is part of the main quest line. She drops the Athame. The decks are dropped by Don Manzana, who's also part of the main quest line, and the rings are dropped by Design Duelist, who is also part of the main quest line. So realistically, this gear, I would say, is very much an increase. So if you're at this point in the game and you still have Darkmoor gear, absolutely you should probably start looking into better gear sets, because at this point, if you're wearing Darkmoor gear, you're vastly underpowered compared to where you should be. So keep that in mind, farm a new gear set at this point. But I would say the Aeon gear is probably an A tier. The only downside to Aeon right now that keeps it from being into S is that Reaver and Avatar gear are in 10 levels. So realistically, doing Wallaroo, you can probably just power through Wallaroo and get to the Reaver or Avatar gear, so keep that in mind with the Aeon gear. Alright, finally we have Reaver and Avatar. Now, I'm gonna come out and say it, I think the Reaver gear at this point, since the Avatar gear in the game, has been made slightly less worth it. And the reason for that is that most of the Reaver gear, the hat, robe, and boots, is dropped from Malice, which on console is going to be the most unbearable slog of a dungeon you've ever done in your life. Considering on PC, it's already the most unbearable slog of a dungeon you've ever done in your life. On console, it's going to be even worse. So keep that in mind, but the rest of it is dropped from the various end fight bosses in the different areas of the game. The amulet's dropped from Crash Bandicoot, who is a side quest in the Wobbegong territory, I believe. I believe you get the quest from the resort from an NPC there, and she will send you to the Wobbegong territory to beat Crash Bandicoot. The decks, I believe, are from Mr. Montgomery, who is at the kind of end of Novus when you go back to Novus. The Athame is dropped from the ship fight at the end of the Novus section, and then Freddy Croker drops the ring, who is at the end of the Wallaroo kind of dream nightmare sequence, whatever. I would say this gear set is very good, and with the inclusion of circle jewels, it makes it that much better, because at this point everyone in the game can reach like 230 damage, which is insanely good. So keep that in mind with the Reaver set. However, the reason why the Reaver sets moved down is to talk about the next gear set, the Avatar gear set. The Avatar fights, in my opinion, are much better and much smoother to go through to get all of the pieces of the gear than the Reaver is. The hat, robe, and boots are dropped by Khonsu at the end, and Khonsu fight ends up being incredibly easy, almost like a cutscene fight, which I find to be much easier to farm than most like the Aeon and the Reaver gear set. So for the hat, robe, and boots, I would definitely recommend farming Khonsu instead of Malice, because Malice is just horrible. And then the Athame and the ring, obviously you can choose to farm Freddy Croker and the ships if you want to, or you can choose to farm, I believe it's the Loon Knight, and then there's one other boss, like the tree boss in Selenopolis. Now, I will say about the Avatar gear is that I heard and I saw that apparently on the console version it might have been buffed, but I'm not sure. If it was buffed, then it's definitely an S tier. If it wasn't buffed, I would still say it's an S tier, but I'll leave it up to you. The buff looked very sizable, and I don't know if KingsIsle was like testing out the stats, but I'm talking like the boots gave like 50 damage instead of 40, which is a massive increase. I kind of almost think it was a mistake that they didn't mean to do, or like a change that they're going to revert. But either way, I think the Avatar gear is probably better than Reaver because it's much easier to get. So I'll put it at S tier just on virtue of it being the best gear set in the game. Now that right there was how worth each gear set is to farm in Wizard101 on the console version. My voice is tired. I've been speaking for 35 minutes. I hope this at least kind of made it easier for you to think about by listing all of the major gear sets and when to farm them and where to farm them. I tried to include, you know, where you get them from each one, where to start the quest, whatever. But this is kind of where I would rank it. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below. And if you found this helpful, definitely let me know in the comments below. And if you want, you can join and become a channel member. Or just, you know, if not, you can drop a like at the sub button, whatever. That's going to be it for today. I'm going to edit this video and then rest my voice for a while because I streamed 5 hours yesterday. I talked for, you know, a good hour and a half today. So I'm going to take a break. I'll see you guys in the next video. Have a fantastic day. Thank you all for watching.